Welcome to the University of Uppsala, Sweden, where we are pleased to be hosting the seminar series, The Prospects of Criticism, part of our joint research project with the University of Louisville, Kentucky, funded by the Templeton Religion Trust as part of the Art Seeking Understanding program. In this seminar, recorded on Thursday the 4th of May 2023, Professor Eileen John of the University of Warwick reflects on her experience in adapting her expertise as a philosopher of art to the practice of writing an exhibition review. In the course of her discussion, Professor John raises questions about what we expect from art critics, about the idea and aims of what might be called philosophical criticism, and how different areas of expertise, such as her own in the philosophy of literature, can bring different qualities to the fore in our experience of looking at paintings.
So I'm very, very happy that Eileen John will be presenting today. She's been a member of this group since the beginning, so she doesn't need an introduction. But of course, if you're working on the kind of project that we are, she's a star in this field. So she inspired much of the best work. She's produced much of it. She's sort of omnipresent in debates on the cognitive value of literature and related topics. So she's a professor at the University of Warwick, and she's was a professor for many years at the University of Louisville. I know that because I have her old office, and I still have many of your old exams from 20 years ago, apparently. Anyway, she will be talking about sharing with us something interesting that BGA just started, I think, doing about a year ago, exhibition reviews. So is going to really enact what it looks like when a philosopher engages in criticism. This is going to be an interesting case study. And with that, Eileen, I'll let you say a few words. And this is sort of pre-read, so we've all looked at the text, and we'll go right into questions. But Eileen, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for letting me do the seminar. I've been really enjoying it, and regretted every one of those that I had to miss. But anyway, I decided that I'm not doing a paper. I'm going to tell you about an experience I had. And now I'm actually seeing Hans Mays here. I'm going to be talking about an experience Hans helped me to have involving criticism and my difficulties with it. And my enjoyment of it. So I think it's nicely tied into what we've been doing here, but I'm going to share a screen and just get started. Is that okay? All right. So I'm just starting so you can see a little bit, a couple of images of paintings from a show that was at Tate Britain in sort of November to February last year, by Lynette Yayadam Boki. And one thing I want to say is, so Hans, on behalf of the BJA, invited me to do a review of this exhibition. And I did circulate the review that I came up with, but I'm actually not expecting that you've read it. But if I just thought you might want to, or it might be interesting to you, or you might look at it afterwards. So I won't assume you've read it. And anyway, I won't actually say a lot about the exhibition, but these are two rather different representative examples from the show. Some of them, as the image on the right, A Passion Like No Other, they're they're really unsettled in where or when they are, or even possibly what kind of being we're looking at, sort of possibly a dancer or possibly something more mystical. And the other one is sort of set outside in a kind of recognizable landscape, but not specified really. Okay. And they're both images of Black people. That was the substance of the show. So that was rather important in a certain way. Okay. Now I'm going to actually start with a quote from one of the sessions from this seminar that I really enjoyed. This is the art critic Laura Cumming, and she says toward the beginning of her interview with Guy, philosophers are the most equipped to look at art because you have the most open minds and you have the greatest curiosity and desire. Oh, wait, I have to get rid of myself. Just a second. I have us covering part of the screen. How do I make that not? Okay, maybe that's pretty good. Okay, you have the greatest curiosity and a desire to resolve what it is you are thinking, a desire to resolve what it is you are thinking about what you are seeing. I think you are the ideal critics. So great, that sounds fantastic. Is there a chance that it is true? All right, so this was sort of a very generous opening move on her part as she began to address a group of mainly philosophers. So I'm not trying to say this is Cummings' settled view, but I found it a nice sort of provocation. And it has led me to think some about what is philosophical criticism of art, what can philosophy bring to the critical project? And I'm really not going to say enough about that at all. I just ran out of time or room or whatever, but I'm going to make a little entry into this for this seminar. So here was my task: write an exhibition review of Lynette Jairam-Boke's Fly in League with the Night at Tate Britain. And my possible qualification for this was that I have an interest in fictionality and the ethical value of art. I think I learned I was not the first choice for this, and I think there are good reasons why I'm not wouldn't have been the first choice, but anyway, I looked up the artist and learned that she paints portraits of imagined people, and this really intrigued me, and I was happy to do it. So I thought, oh, this is great. I've never done anything like this, and the project of this painter just sounded interesting to me. And I was given some models of these exhibition reviews to look at, and they're really excellent, by Bence Nane and Vid Simonidi. Nane was writing about a Van Eyck show and Simonidi a Warhol show. And I'm actually going to give you a little bit too much text on the next screen because I want to give you a sense of what they did with their reviews because I thought they were really good. So here's a little bit from each of them. Well, I can't get rid of certain things. Let's see. Oh. Right. The take-home, here's Nane. The take-home message of the comparisons between Van Eyck and the Italians is that they painted the very same scenes, but just look how much better Van Eyck was doing. This Hegelian way of thinking about the history of art as a project with a definite direction, less realistic to more realistic, has been long out of fashion in art history and aesthetics, but this exhibition has revived the wider appeal of this Eurocentric narrative. He goes on, I'm skipping a lot of this. Anyway, the deeper point is that the emphasis on optical revolution in this exhibition is in tension with the overall cult of genius that permeates the exhibition. Okay, and then he just wraps up by saying, this is a review for a philosophy journal, and as a result, I focus on philosophical issues raised by the exhibition. Having said that, there are a lot of breathtaking paintings to be seen here, and it is obviously an exhibition worth seeing. Okay, here's from Simonidi on Warhol. Again, I just have to move something. Okay. The show's argument, we might say, is for an existential, almost existentialist Warhol. This is quite an achievement, given that there are, in fact, few references to existential concerns in Warhol's work. He goes on, in all, I thought that the curator's emphasis on mortality came off convincingly. There is that vague, hard to make sense of sadness about Warhol's art and life. but I found the exhibition less persuasive when it came to the other two stated themes, Warhol's status as an immigrant and as a queer artist, and he defends why he thinks those are less persuasive. Oops, something weird here. Sorry. Finally, so at the end, he says, finally, as a philosopher, I could not go to an Andy Warhol exhibition without looking out for the white Brillo boxes, the work that has exercised such a curious influence on our discipline. However, encountering the Brillo boxes at the exhibition, looking rather dejected, I thought, in the corner of the second room, was a mixed experience. On the one hand, how marvelous it was to think there was a time when Danto could go into a gallery, see a hot new work by Warhol, and publish his reflections that same year as a proper philosophy paper in the Journal of Philosophy. But on the other hand, how odd to think that of all the crazy things Warhol was up to in the 1960s, this is the work we philosophers have spent most of our time thinking about. Well, the interests of art and philosophy do not always coincide. Although perhaps next time we think about contemporary art philosophically, we can pay a bit more attention to death and sex. Okay. So I'll just say, I think they do a number of things. They both bring extensive knowledge of the artist and the relevant artistic scene to their task and the historical scene. As I only gave you little hints of this, but they link philosophical traditions and problems to the exhibition in a very clear, lucid way. How do these works and their display engage with, say, genius or art and progress or existentialist concerns or with Danto art and the aesthetic? And they really review the exhibition, what it aimed to do, what it did, what was good or problematic in those aims and achievements. You know, the exhibitions, how they were curated, what was included, excluded, their highlighted themes and their arguments were interpreted and assessed. And I think both of these 2 points, these are examples of what philosophical criticism can be. Obviously, if you're talking about how philosophical ideas are engaged in the works, but also sort of the project of an exhibition can be philosophical in a certain way. And I thought they were bringing that out really nicely. And I also thought just the way they wrote these, they brought the experience of seeing the exhibition to life, and they both were writing with flair, sort of more informally or conversationally than for a standard philosophical essay. They were showing some feeling for the event. Okay, now I'm not sure I read these before I agreed to do this, but when I read them, I started to have a sense of worry. Various kinds, but anyway, here were some of my problems. I don't know much about painting. I'm a very average enjoyer, averagely knowledgeable person about painting. I really don't know much about this particular artist, her work. I had never seen her work in person. And now, once I've seen the exhibition, I really enjoyed it. But as I was going through it, I was also filled with this sense, I don't think my enjoyment is particularly relevant to what is philosophically interesting about the works. And sort of relatedly, I don't think that my evaluations of these paintings or the exhibition would be worth paying attention to by anyone other than maybe a friend or family member who could be interested in what I like and dislike. Fourth, and this was really brought home to me by reading these other examples of exhibition reviews, I have not practiced thinking about exhibitions as a form, as themselves objects of critical assessment. I think maybe Andrew, I can't see anyone at the moment, but I think Andrew Huddleston is here. And maybe he was at an event at Warwick this year where our colleague Dearmit really criticized an exhibition in this sense, like looked at how the thing was put together And I had a kind of brute disagreement with what Dermot was saying, but I didn't know, I just hadn't thought about it. I think I just rarely reached that level. I'm still trying to figure out what's this object here doing, what's that, and this idea of how you assess the whole and the reasoning behind it. Thought, okay, I don't know how to do that. This is a living artist, and that also made me really uncomfortable. I just thought, I can't, I don't really feel ready to engage with the evaluation of a living artist. I guess that was my worry. Okay, so what could I do that wouldn't be illegitimate? And how could this task somehow benefit from my philosophical identity? Okay. So here are some of my legitimizing, but possibly also defensive thoughts on all of this, or what I ended up doing. So I thought, well, I can compare the paintings somehow with things I do know more about. I think much more about literature and about literary representations of people. And I could think about literary genres that somehow make contact with these paintings. So I do think fable is probably relevant to some of them. Okay. And then luckily for me, Yadam Boki is also a writer, and the catalog included this extract from her fiction that was really interesting, and just was able to, it like helped me with this comparative work. Like, what happens when you're creating a fictional character with words, and then whatever she's doing in these paintings with imagined people. So that was helpful, but sort of that was a little bit contingent. And of course, then because she was imagining the subjects, so these were not paintings of real people. I could think about the notion of fiction and how it might apply to a portrait of an imagined person. And this did send me off to read more really wonderful work in philosophy about portraits. So Hans is maybe one of the key people in this field, and it's fascinating. Like all the things that are involved in the practice of portrait making, and then what might or might not be activated when there is no real person being portrayed. Anyway, so that was helpful to me, although it ended up, I couldn't even fit in all of that into the review, but still, for me, this was the exhibition and thinking about it got me inside some philosophical thinking I hadn't really thought much about. So here's a little bit from the review I wrote. The exhibition made a certain contrast palpable to me. If you start with a conception of fictional characters derived from literature, you can think of them, that is, fictional characters, at least the ones that take center stage, as beings that prescribe the content of imaginings and can even seem more fully knowable and known than a real person. Oops, what's going on here? Lynette Yayadamboki's figures on them in resisting temporality. I won't explain, but I think they resist temporality in a certain way. They resist story form as well. These figures do not impress on viewers the need to enter the temporal flow of problem, decision, action, consequence, and reaction that is basic to story. And I will say here, I think I was disagreeing with some of the things in the catalog of the. I think it's just a normal thing to say, like, oh, they're imagined, so I get to imagine their story. And I guess that just didn't happen for me. I actually thought there was these are imagined and you don't know their story and you don't have to imagine their story. So that was a little bit of my personal reaction to the paintings that I don't know. I mean, it mattered to what I said, but I felt in a way, how could I insist on that? If other people said they were going off and imagining the stories behind these figures, I don't know, maybe they were. So I'm just acknowledging a certain difficulty in this kind of argument. And lastly, maybe this project of the artist presses the value of releasing representation of specifically Black subjects from the need to have a story, tell a story, or be determinately part of a socio-historical context that holds many traps. So that's a little summary of ideas I was trying to put on the table. So in the end, I found the exhibition really philosophically interesting. It gave me a sense of a fictional character as partly detachable from the project of prescribing story imaginings. I felt I was seeing what needed to be seen, what could be known in the paintings. And using the paintings as props for make-believe, if that means the crucial work of the painting would lie in that imagining activity, was suppressed or less needed. And I could speculate about ethically interesting reasons for doing this that concern race and storytelling. Okay, however, I found it very hard to get into the mode that I found quite appealing in Manet and Simonidi, where I felt like they were conveying the thinking, evaluating, personally engaged wrestling with an object of critical attention. I remained a bit too much at the level of philosophical puzzle, and perhaps that's not quite interesting enough to anyone who does not work on fiction as a philosophical topic. So I did feel like I'd remained kind of on the safe end of things, like not really putting evaluations out there, but just trying to unpack what I found sort of philosophically interesting. Okay, so some concluding thoughts. And this is what I thought I would do more of this, but I just couldn't. There's a lot to say here about what is really good art criticism. For me, I just think it generally is working in a philosophical sense, at a philosophical level. So I'd say there's a huge amount of philosophical thinking in art criticism, if not usually by card-carrying philosophers, though there are philosophers who really do this. I had some examples like from Cavell that, or actually a number of you. I feel like people are doing this, but maybe we don't call it art criticism. Okay, I'm hoping we can talk about this. I think critics help us see what views of life and reality are on offer in art, and what is satisfying or not, and how those views are artistically embodied. Second, if you were going to engage in an evaluative review, you had better have relevant knowledge. That's what I felt. I would have needed a purchase on what else has been made, done, and thought in the relevant domain, or even a way to figure out what the relevant domain is. I just felt a little bit like I was not well grounded in what else to think about. If you want to reach judgments that have a claim on anonymous others' attention. I mean, I'm sort of independently interested in the talk about art that we carry on with our friends and family. I think that's very important and wonderful. And in that talk, I think we should be trying to size things up often, like, well, I liked this, didn't like that. I think that's really important. But I just think it's somewhat, for me, it has a different bearing on a conversation than me trying to evaluate this painter's work or the way the exhibition was carried out. So if you don't have that knowledge that I'm saying is relevant, and also I think temperament has to do it. Maybe I just don't have the right temperament or the guts or the confidence, whatever. You can still respond. This is my defense. I mean, I think you can still respond in a way that claims at least philosophical attention. I guess I'd say, yes, of course, philosophers should be trying to really get inside works of art, even when they lack some of what you might think is crucial knowledge. I just want to say, no, there's room for this. There's room for us being, to some extent, amateur art lovers who are philosophers who can somehow put those things together. But you have to work with what you have. And perhaps that means sticking to what I think I did in this review, interpreting and articulating something about how the art and the ideas bear on each other. Now, I'll just say, if Yair Boki's paintings have the philosophical interest that for me, they had, I do take that to be relevant to their artistic worth. Like, I wouldn't say that that's just one, philosophical interest over there, artistic worth over here. But I think the philosophical interest is just a start, that's a route into appreciating an artist's work in an artistically satisfactory way. It's just not the whole thing. Okay, I think that I'm done there. I did have one example that I think I won't, I'll just leave it on the PowerPoint, but I do have one more thing to say. So I'll go back to what Cummings said, because I really liked what she said, and I'm just still wondering, is this true? But she said that philosophers have a desire to resolve what it is we think about what we see. And I'd say, okay, maybe that is a kind of trait or disposition of philosophers looking at art. And that sounds like something we could aim legitimately to do. And I found it quite hard to do, but a great thing to try. Okay, so I'll stop there. And I'll just say the example I put on the last page is from an art critic I didn't know that Cumming mentioned, Tom Lubbock, writing about Eva Hess. So I'll leave it there. You can see it later if you want.
Thank you. I suspect I speak for all of us when I say we really appreciate this very honest look at the grounds of your own attempts at philosophical criticism. It's something certainly Guy, Elizabeth, and I are thinking about. So thank you very much for this. We have plenty of time for questions. So anyone would like to? Oh, David.
Thanks so much, Eileen. That was very interesting. I've never had this experience, but I would love to have it, of being asked to do something like this. But so one of the things I think it was in Bensay's review, I thought was very interesting with respect to this question, what philosophers can bring to this kind of endeavor. And that was his reference to the argument of an exhibition, right? And I think sometimes it's obvious that there's an argument behind an exhibition. The most notorious example was Rubin's 1984 Primitivism exhibition at MoMA, where there were 2 complete volumes of essays stressing exactly what the argument of the whole exhibition was supposed to be. And this is why it got ridiculed by people like Danto. But I think even in the case of exhibitions that aren't so obviously dialectical in intention, there's always a reason why the various works have been chosen out of the overall oeuvre of the artist or the selection of artists. And there's also a reason why those that have been selected have been organized in the way that they do. So I found it interesting. I mean, you picked up to some extent on this when you said that you disagreed with the story that the catalogue was saying about some of the pictures and seeing them as being narrative, whereas you didn't see them as narrative. But I think what's also interesting is that there's very often a covert argument in an exhibition. They don't come out front and say it, but I think it's something that as philosophers, we're perhaps well equipped to detect. We can say, well, look, I've read all these things and they seem to be trying to make a point here. And it seems to me this is something that we are perhaps better equipped to do, to both detect covert arguments, to criticize overt arguments, and to just generally reflect on whether the claims being made are justified given the exhibition. So I wonder if you have any views on that as another kind of thing. You didn't really focus on that, but I thought Bensay's term was very interesting.
Yeah, I'm really glad you picked up on that. Now, I was just trying to think, I think it is actually Vid who uses the term argument, but Nane Bense may also. I just can't see it. Anyway, it's explicit in Vid talking about the Warhol exhibition. And I agree with you. I mean, obviously, we are trained to look for arguments and to be able to articulate them. And I think that is a useful, I think that could be a particular skill we have that could be well applied and kind of satisfyingly applied to this rather unargumentative looking entity of an exhibition. Of course, as you say, the catalogs may spell one out, but even if they do, I mean, I think the exhibition might sort of sprawl in some way that makes it difficult to discern an argument. And I think, although now I'm worried I'm not going to remember quite well enough, I think what Bense was saying is the explicit argument with the Van Eyck exhibition was the optical revolution, but that he thought there was also this cult of genius principle or reason behind the exhibition, and he didn't think those meld perfectly. So I found that quite I think that is an interesting thing to look for. And if the philosopher is someone who is especially going to be looking for the reasons behind this sort of complex event, I think that's great. And if they can articulate them the way I think they both did, like, wonderful, because that would really deepen the most viewers or attenders of these things are going to have a hard time like discerning such reasons, and then to have somebody really nail it and bring it to this kind of articulate discourse, I think is a really useful thing. So yeah, I guess doing this thing, it got me really interested in what is it that one is reviewing when one reviews an exhibition. And I'm just saying, wow, it could take a huge amount of knowledge and a willingness to, do that, like look for the reasons and do they all fit together, and is the argument pursued well. Now, let me just back up and say, I can imagine someone saying argument is the wrong term to bring to bear on an exhibition. They are events. They are these collective projects that are going to involve all kinds of people's reasons, decisions. It would be wrong to impose the argument on them. So I think there could be an interesting debate to be had just about the applicability of the argument structure, but I found it persuasive here.
Thanks, Eileen.
Thank you. Guy.
Oh, thank you very much. It was fascinating, Eileen. Thank you very much. And I really enjoyed reading the review as well. And I think it was very honest of you to spend to give so much, share so much of the kind of wrangling that you went through in order to think that you had something to say. But I mean, another thought is, well, of course you had something to say. I mean, everybody has something to say, and your job as a philosopher is having things to say and saying them. And so anybody who has that surely is in a position to say something. And I have two questions really. One is just open reflection on, have we just become too formalistic almost about what our requirements of a piece of criticism should be? I mean, surely it's true that many reviews do offer an evaluation, but some seem never to quite get there, but in the same time or same space will be just telling us something very interesting, which of course brings certain aspects of an exhibition or a book to life. So that seems to me like just a worry that, like, the fact that this commission which resulted in a wonderful text with a wonderful set of thoughts. The fact this commission gave you so much heartache, in a certain sense, or material for fruitful philosophical reflection, another way of putting it, it kind of suggests that, you know, we're in a funny place, really, where we have so many misgivings about what exactly should be going on under the name of criticism. So that was one thing. My more technical question is I was slightly worried by this concept of fictional when applied to paintings of people for whom or figures for whom there is no model. And I wondered if any of these program essays have gone into this. I mean, I understand it's a trait that the artist kind of brings out there, but it seems to me that the concept of fictional doesn't quite track what's going on when one paints from the imagination, which is, you know, often the case. Anyway, two very different questions.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with, well, both questions are kind of hard, but I'll just say something about the second one. Like, I think what you're suggesting is that there would be a different way to go here in thinking about the bearing of these paintings or other paintings that had this similar origin, that wouldn't mean turning to the notion of fiction, if I'm repeating what you said properly. And I think that would be interesting too, to say, like, this is how those paintings are talked about, that she makes these fictional characters, but maybe that's that's a spreading the notion of fiction somehow inappropriately to the domain of painting, and that we actually shouldn't count them as fictional characters. They are something else. So they're imagined people, let's say, or there's some evocation of people that is merely imagined, but that doesn't suffice to make them into fictional beings or characters. I guess I don't have a very good, should have a better answer to this. I just took the pressure to be in the other direction. Like, if this is possible, where you've got these evocations of people who don't exist, they're definitely fictional characters, but they're just not behaving the way I typically think fictional characters behave, or they're not asking me to do what I typically do with fictional characters. So I took it I'm going to embrace this all with the notion of fiction, and I'm going to think I need to perhaps change my notion of fiction. But so I'm just saying the same thing over and over. I like the idea that there's a different way to go here, but I don't have the word or the term for what you're suggesting. So maybe that's just somebody else has to come up with, well, what should we say these things are if they're not fiction? I don't know. So I don't have a good answer. And then I really liked what you were saying about, in a way, being more relaxed, sort of embracing the possibility that, well, everyone has something to say about art, or they could have something to say, and we should be ready for whatever it is. We should embrace that. We should welcome that, and we should be less uptight about qualifications for being a critic. So in a way, I quite like that. And I think I misrepresented this process if I said it was just heartache. It was really fun. It's just I just kept having a doubt that I was like, oh my gosh, why, I don't know. I just felt a little bit like the ground was not under my feet, and I just was going to write it anyway. And that wasn't a heartache. It was just sort of weird, like, yeek, on what basis am I doing this? I wasn't sure, but I was very glad to do it. I was happy to do it, but anyway, I just thought it might be interesting for this audience to like try to think about that. Like, what ground do you need to have under your feet? And I think you're saying, just be whatever you are. There will be some ground there. You just might not have thought it you might not have accepted it as appropriate, and you should. Now, on the other hand, what do I want from a critic? I'm not sure I want to hear from just anybody about whatever they thought or felt about art. I really like hearing from the people who like Vid just knew a lot more about what had been left out of the Warhol exhibition, and I didn't know, or I wouldn't have, I just didn't. So it was interesting to me. It was like his views about that affected why he thought they hadn't made a persuasive case about the things he didn't think they'd made a persuasive case on. You know, that they could have shown the Warhol's engagement with sexuality much better than they did. So that, and he had examples to back that up. And so I just think, yeah, I'd like to read that, and not me, who doesn't know enough about Warhol. But in general, I guess I should say I do like your point. Like, let's relax. It isn't like there's some tick box of things you have to do to be a good critic. Well, maybe I'm being incoherent there, but
that's wonderful answer. Thank you. I just think the tick box, all that maybe the tick box should really contain is saying something interesting and saying it well. You know, saying something interesting in a good way. That's kind of what one's after. Anyway, thank you very much for the answer. I'll move off.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks very much for the talk. I really enjoyed it. I just wanted to say, well, I thought it was nice that you picked up on Laura's idea there about how philosophers are kind of driven by this need to resolve things and understand things, and that seems true. Of course, you know, we come to all sorts of objects of inquiry, be it a moral problem or an artwork or anything else, and we just want to try to understand it. You know, whether we're kind of card-carrying cognitivists about art or not, there's a sense in which we want to kind of enhance our experience or relation with the object of inquiry, such that we feel that, you know, we gain something in that kind of way. But I think that doesn't that sometimes make or create a risk that philosophers are also kind of bullies about art or about anything? I mean, I can think of various works of contemporary art which, in a way, either you look at the artwork and it does so by itself, or the artist behind the artwork, which somehow, well, cases which kind of resist that kind of need for resolution. You know, so I think it's true, and I think I recognize myself in a lot of the things that you say, but I've also been in situations where I have felt a bit like a bully in relation to the artwork because of that need to do what you described. Whereas, of course, not all artworks want that or need that or perhaps even benefit from that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's a quite nice point, or reminder or caution or something. So yeah, I too was struck by her use of the word resolve, and thought, yeah, maybe that is part of our drive to somehow or other reach a resolved understanding of something. Now, one thing I suppose I could say is that there are more and less bullying resolutions. You know, I mean, like the example from Cavell that I was thinking of using. Like, well, I often don't fully understand what Cavell is saying anyway, but I think it's a very unresolved resolution. You know, whatever he's saying, it's like it's so open to pursuit in who knows what way that he is saying something that affirms something, but it's also like you know, lots of questions are left open about exactly how to follow through on this way of thinking. So that's one thing. The content of the resolution could be relatively irresolute, I suppose. But then it also seems to matter a lot how, like, the way you present your resolution. So for instance, I guess I brought in briefly this issue that I sort of confronted but didn't really deal with, which is I very much experience these paintings as not prescribing imagining. I mean, they did in this very, oh, there's a person. You know, of course, you could say that that's a little bit of imagining, but it was like, that's it. Yep. Of course, with any person, there is a lot to know, but I am not going to know it. And I don't think I should even be imagining. Like, so now people, one of the people, especially in the catalog, definitely said, oh, you just have to imagine whatever, the so-and-so's story. And I just thought, no, I really don't understand that. But you could say I was a bit bullying in my resolution because I clung to that strong experience I had had. And I think in a better review or a more less bullying review, I should have really confronted that. I should have said, I'm not sure what to make of this. If someone thinks these are really storytelling or story inviting, then they have a very different way of dealing with this. And that should perhaps be an unresolved question about these paintings. That I think would have been a better way to handle that.
It could be very frustrating, right? I mean, if you're in that situation. I didn't mean to suggest that you were a bully at all. But,
no, I know, but I mean, you're just making me think. But the other thing, I guess I want to say, in terms of like the rhetoric of all this, it's just really important that somebody says something that then other people can react to, you know, and you know, like we're, you know, marking student papers when they don't actually say anything. They just like, yeah, explain a bunch of things and there's nothing you can really react to. I find that that's like as frustrating too. And philosophers, I suppose, are rarely guilty of that. But if you're writing about this object of human interest, a set of artworks, and you don't take some stand about what they mean or what's good about them or what can be thought about them, then I feel like maybe that's just too, I don't know. It doesn't generate a conversation well enough.
Thank you. I totally agree with you.
Jonathan.
Elizabeth's question was the core of my question. So I'm going to amplify just a little bit of it. And because I had the same worry and I thought not a worry, but just there seems to be a nice distinction in your talk about articulation, the articulation of what's going on in the painting in an exhibition, and the importance of like Guy said a second ago, of articulating that well and seeing what might be of interest in this set of works that we're looking at, or in a performance that we're looking at, or whatever. And just the clear articulation of a way through that is in a way an argument. You're excluding a bunch of other ways of thinking about it. You're recommending a way of thinking about it. You're articulating a particular way of looking or a way of experiencing. And it seems like that comes apart from a resolution that of how we ought to look at it, or something like this. And so I wonder if in your second to the last response to Elizabeth, you used argument in a way that I thought was sort of subordinate to this overall articulation of the work. Like there are ways of looking at this that seem not to serve this way of looking at the work, and it's not clear that would, whether the overarching goal is an argument or a resolution. There are little mini arguments to get you there, but it seems like the critical articulation of an experience of a work is in itself sort of valuable. And it seems like most of the job of the critic sometimes to me. Is that coherent?
So are you saying that, okay, if you're trained as a philosopher, then you have an idea about what's supposed to happen as you move from the beginning of some discourse to the end. You're supposed to have an argument. You're supposed to start here and reason your way there, and that in a way the work of talking about, say, some paintings might just be the trajectory can be different. There can be argumentative bits in there, but there's something else, there's a different structure that you could or maybe should be aiming for, which is this articulation of some possibilities of experience and what is interesting about them. And that's fine, that's enough. And it wouldn't, if you handle it well, it would not have the bullying problem. It would be kind of clear that this is articulating one path and there are other paths. I'm not sure so was that part of what you were?
Yep. That's that's what I was suggesting. And it would also in a way, so your worry about of contingency, of your contingency of approach to works seems mitigated by that. So if I'm not coming to a conclusion at the end, or if I'm not resolving something at the end, it would seem weird to start out at an idiosyncratic spot, take us on an idiosyncratic path, and then resolve what the work is. So if you take the resolution away, I contingently start. I want to look at these under the umbrella of to look at this set of works under the umbrella of fiction because it seems interesting, and this is what I think about, and here's why I think about it. Here's why it's interesting to think about, and to avoid the conclusion, the resolution about the work seems to relieve some of the contingency, idiosyncrasy, bullying. I was once accused of being ideological in one of my reviews of Shostakovich, right? Of being ideological, right?
Sure. So maybe it's that there could always be a layer of methodology, and that makes it sound really clumsy, but something about what's the space of possibilities in relation to experience and interpretation and evaluation of art. Well, it's actually pretty big, and I'm going to do my best to offer all of that in a way that I find compelling, but that's what it is. I mean, this idea, I think several of the critics, the actual working critics we've talked to in this seminar, and they've said something to this effect, that there's a sort of personal angle that is inescapable, and that they, even if it's not sort of signposted all the way in what they're doing, that's part of their conception of what they're doing. One possible route into all of this.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ule.
Oh, thank you. Eileen, thanks very much for your talk. I enjoyed it very much, and there was much interesting to get from it. And one of your topics was, philosophers talking about art, and do we actually have something to say? I was sure to be last here because I wasn't entirely sure my comment would be relevant, but it's relevant on philosophers talking about art. Some years back, I was invited to speak at an art gallery with contemporary, quite well-established artists usually coming in with exhibitions. So my status as a professor of philosophy and a wine nerd, that's what made them make the call. So I was asked to serve wine and to talk about the connections between the wine and the painting at this exhibition. You know, the gallery was concerned to get people in, preferably people with some money. So they had events where, to begin with, I chose the wines, and the curator would speak about the art. And but later it developed into a sommelier, you know, talking about the wine, the curator talking about the art, and then me making the connections, and preferably throwing in some philosophical wisdom or something from cognitive science or similar. So that's you know. I won't say I suffered from imposter syndrome, but the whole thing was so weird I just couldn't say no, and it was sufficiently successful for me to be called back, well, until the pandemic set in and the whole thing came to an end. But it was surprisingly interesting to try and make something that's not completely spurious, of connection between the sensory input from, you know, the visuals and what you have in the glass. And sometimes this was quite a weak connection, and sometimes it, you know, the connections were quite, you know, surprisingly insightful. You know, not because I had the insight, but because the matches were revealing. And we ended up, the sommelier and myself, we went through the exhibition and picked some paintings and decided on which wines to serve. And surprisingly often we had the very same idea for the wine pairing with the paintings, which is, you know, something to ponder. But you said you suffered from slight imposter syndrome, and you know, the imposter syndrome was perhaps the main reason for actually doing this sort of thing. Quite weird, but also very interesting for me, I must say. Yeah.
So I mean, I think you're talking about like stretching ourselves in some way where we might not be able to be sure at the outset that it would be worth doing. You know, is it worth trying to pair wines and paintings, or visual? And so I think you carried out like an experiment there, and it sounds, I think the rest of us all want to try your experiment. But I mean, it sounds like you found, like you learned that there was something to think about there. I mean, we could have another session on what was there to think about there, but I would trust you that it wasn't, especially if you and the sommelier were agreeing, like, so that's interesting, like the connections. It reminds me a little bit of when people talk about, I don't know, just like the difficulty of comparing across art forms and genres and so on. And of course, it does seem ludicrous to say, oh, this symphony is like that painting, I suppose. And yet, like, these things can kind of link for us. We can feel sympathies or kind of contests or something. And it's just very hard to talk about them or to, you know, figure out where to go with them. But I'd say that's a little what you're talking about, something that we don't try often enough, I guess.
Yeah, on paper, as I said, I would have written it off as completely spurious. In practice, it turned out to be a lot more interesting than I had imagined.
Thank you. It's been an hour. Eileen, is it okay if we linger a few more minutes for questions? I have one, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Have I skipped anybody before I go on and ask my own? So I really enjoyed this, and I liked the fact that you're primarily a literature person. You work on novels and poetry, and you have the courage to go talk about painting. And I'm not sure if this is a question or a banal observation, but I'm going to give it a try. I mean, what you said really made vivid for me how different criticism is in literary context. Obviously, it isn't mediated by a curator. And it isn't works, it's a work. And it's pretty easy to, in the case of literature, easy is the wrong word, but you know how to claim a kind of authority for your criticism. You take yourself to be responsible to a text And if you know how to engage in a close reading, you feel like you can conquer its structure and say all sorts of things about it. But with an exhibition, it's completely different because of the intrusions of the curator. So I was struck by what Vid said. That Warhol show came to the Speed Museum here, and the director of curatorial studies at my university said very similar things. If you went to see that exhibition of Warhol, you would have come out with the entirely wrong impression of both the role of sexuality and religion in his work. In other words, it falsified Warhol. So there's great grounds for skepticism. A bad curator completely misrepresents the artist. And your criticism is going to go, if that's what you're engaging with and you don't know a tremendous amount, so it's very unlike the literary case, you're going to misrepresent the artist as well in your criticism. So I guess the question would be, we think in philosophy, we talk about what is criticism? Is it interpretation plus evaluation, something like that, the kind of work Noel Carroll produces? Is that question just way too general? And do we need to think about kinds of criticism? And they're going to function very differently in different critical contexts. Does your talk suggest that we need to change the way we think, we approach philosophical discussions of criticism? All right.
I don't think I have a good answer to that or thought about that. I guess, well, one thing to take from what you just said is, whatever criticism is, we should expect that there are issues of truth and falsity. There's issues of veracity that matter, that might be, you're not going to get at them exactly from the level of the close reading of the individual object. So that's to say that, well, this supports my sense that there's a lot of care to be taken with certain kinds of critical judgment that this issue, like, how do you assess an exhibition? Well, I'd say that for me, this looks like an unusual kind of demand where there's some way in which you kind of have to know a lot about the context in which a work arose, and perhaps you have to know a lot about the artist's life. I don't normally think that's particularly relevant when I'm reading a novel or poem. I mean, I tend to be a bit like not not so concerned with, what does this have to do with the artist's life or the writer's life? But maybe in this kind of art involving project of creating an exhibition, all of this, like the issues of what argument is being made, what facts are being presupposed or screened out, that's just really important. And maybe that is a significantly different kind of criticism. I don't know. I don't think I have a deep answer there.
That was great. A final question. Looking, I don't see any hands. Well, with that, let's thank Eileen for the wonderful, wonderful talk. That was fantastic. Thank you so much.
No, thanks everybody for a really nice conversation, and also just really nice to see you.
Thank you. And
thank you for watching this recorded seminar in the series The Prospect of Criticism, part of the Templeton-funded research project, Knowledge, Perception and the Prospects of Criticism. If you'd like to find out more about the project, to learn about upcoming events or watch other recordings in the seminar series, please go to our website www.knowledgeperceptioncriticism.com.